Can you imagine opening your fridge and finding a fish covered in salt, looking like a snow statue? In the Middle Ages, that was totally normal. No electricity, no freezers, and brutal winters, preserving food was a matter of life or death. And believe me, the methods they used ranged from genius to downright crazy. In this video, I'm going to tell you how they made food last for months without rotting. They salted even vegetables, hung meat from the ceiling to smoke it with kitchen fire, buried food in melted fat, or dunked it in barrels of vinegar like human pickles. There were basements that worked like natural fridges, unlit mountains used as if they were medieval Tupperware, and even smoked eggs. So, if you've ever complained about forgetting to put the chicken in the fridge, this video will change your perspective. Like, subscribe, and tell me, would you dare to try any of these medieval methods in your kitchen? And now, without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, lovers of the strange. Today we travel back to a time when refrigerators were an unheard of luxury. Yes, you heard that right. In the Middle Ages, keeping food fresh was a monumental challenge. Imagine trying to save your Friday night pizza without a fridge. A true nightmare, right? The creativity and adaptability of people back then were amazing. They had to come up with ways to keep food from turning into a bug buffet. So, how did they do it? That's exactly what we're going to explore today. We're diving into some crazy and curious methods our ancestors used to keep their food fresh, from drying meat like gourmet chefs to sealing everything in barrels. The Middle Ages were a real culinary lab, and no, there was no Instagram to show off their achievements, but despite the odds, they did wonders. So buckle up and get ready for a medieval culinary adventure, starting with the first method, salt. First on the list of crazy ideas, salt. Yes, the same stuff you sprinkle on your pasta, but back in the Middle Ages, it was more valuable than gold. Salt was the universal preservative of the time, and without it, daily life would have been a total mess. Imagine having to eat fresh meat every single day. Insane. Salt helped preserve meat, fish, and even vegetables, making sure the food didn't go bad. For example, fishermen used it to prepare salted cod. It was like a 15th century Tupperware, only tastier. And that's not all. Salt had huge economic value. It was so important that in some places, people used it as currency. Yup, just like today you'd pay for your coffee with a coin, in the Middle Ages you could pay with salt. So if you thought salt was just for flavor, think again. In short, salt didn't just preserve food, it kept the economy moving. It was the MVP of food preservation. Now that we've got that covered, we're ready to move on to another fascinating method, smoking. Let's go. Can you imagine walking into a medieval kitchen, the smell of smoke in the air, meat hanging from the ceiling? A feast for the senses. In the Middle Ages, kitchens weren't just for cooking. They were full-on smokehouses. Yes, like a barbecue, but without the background music and with a lot more smoke. Smoking was how our ancestors preserved food. We already learned about salt, but now let's see how smoke also played a key role in food preservation. In those kitchens, meat, cheese, and even eggs were hung up to get smoked. Yes, smoked eggs, can you imagine? A breakfast that not only fills you up, but also leaves you smelling like firewood. Let's talk about the wood. Each type of wood gave a different flavor. They used walnut, applewood, or oak, which, by the way, is not the same as using a popsicle stick. Each one added its own special touch, like every meal was an episode of a cooking reality show. Who would win the smoky flavor challenge this time? Applewood, for example, added a sweetness that turned any pork chop into a delicacy. It was like your food was on a romantic date. So, what kinds of food were smoked? Mostly meat, because no one likes spoiled meat, but also cheeses, which became creamy and full of flavor, making you feel like a gourmet even if you were just a humble peasant. And let's not forget the eggs. Smoked, they became a snack that, if you think about it, could have been the medieval version of deviled eggs, just with a smoky twist. So now you know, smoking wasn't just a preservation method, it was also a great way to impress your friends. How about my smoked meats? They're tastier than those from the village tavern, right? And speaking of impressing, now that we've seen how smoke gave food new life, let's talk about cold in the Middle Ages. Here we go. Attention, nobles. If you thought your fridge was the ultimate invention, wait until you hear this. Let's talk about ice houses. Yes, ice houses. During the Middle Ages, people didn't have access to modern technology like we do, so they had to get creative to preserve their food. These ice houses were well-built structures, often underground or with thick walls. They were made of wood and insulated with straw or earth. Can you imagine a basement full of ice? During winter, they'd collect blocks of ice and snow, store them, and voila! They had their very own medieval refrigerator. And what did they use all that ice for? Mostly to keep food fresh: meat, fish, fruit, everything they needed to survive. Imagine opening a door to find a pile of ice, and behind it, a feast of goodies kept fresh thanks to it. Compared to that, our fridges are just modern versions of these ice houses, only with a button and without the extreme medieval cold. Quite the improvement. We have already seen the power of salt and smoke, but cold also played a key role. So next time you run out of ice, think of the medieval folks and their cleverness. Now, let's talk about a sunnier method: drying. Did you know the sun was also a chef in the Middle Ages? That's right, dehydration was key. Back then, with no fridges or grocery stores around the corner, people had to come up with their own ways to preserve food, and this is where sun drying came in. The process was pretty simple. First, they picked the foods, like fruits, herbs, and yes, even meat. Then they laid them out under the sun for hours, sometimes even days. Picture a giant open-air buffet. The sun worked its magic, removing moisture and preventing spoilage. Fruits like figs and apricots were super popular. Herbs like rosemary and thyme were also sun-dried to preserve their flavor. And the meat? Well, that was dried in a way that made it last for months, a kind of medieval snack. Now, let's talk benefits. First, it's a natural method. You don't need anything but sunlight. Plus, dried foods take up less space and weigh less, which is great if you're traveling or just don't want your pantry to look like a street market. And best of all, drying intensifies the flavors, a taste explosion in every bite. But, like everything in life, it has its downsides. For starters, the weather doesn't always cooperate. If a cloudy day decides to crash your drying party, your food could take way longer to dehydrate. And of course, you have to watch out for bugs. A mosquito in your dried meat is not the best seasoning. Also, sun-drying doesn't preserve all the nutrients as well as other methods. So if you overdo it, you might end up with a snack that's not as nutritious as you'd hoped. So the next time you dry something out, remember your ancestors. They too wanted a tasty treat that wouldn't spoil on them. Now, it's time to talk about fermentation. Let's dive into something that makes our taste buds tingle: fermentation. This is the magical process where microorganisms like bacteria and yeast get to work on food. In the Middle Ages, people didn't have fridges or preservatives, so they got creative by fermenting their meals. And wow, did they do it well. Picture this. You've got a pile of cabbage. Instead of letting it wilt away, you toss it in a jar, cover it with salt, and let it sit. What happens? The good bacteria spring into action. That dish not only tastes great, it can preserve cabbage for months. It's like a culinary magic trick. And let's not forget about beer. Medieval folks drank it not just for fun, but also as a way to stay hydrated. Fermentation transforms sugar into alcohol and bubbles, giving it that unique fizzy flavor. So every time you raise a glass, you're toasting with history. The benefits of fermentation are crystal clear. Not only does it boost flavor, but it also extends the shelf life of food. It's like having your own superpower in the kitchen. Plus, certain fermented foods like yogurt or kimchi are packed with probiotics that are great for your gut health. One more reason to enjoy that sauerkraut. So here's to sauerkraut. Or, as they might have said in the Middle Ages, let's eat what bubbles. Now, let's uncover a surprising method. Who came up with the idea of burying food in fat? The Middle Ages, of course. Today we're digging up a preservation method that might sound odd, but was a lifesaver back then. Instead of having a modern fridge, people in medieval times used animal fat to preserve their food. And no, we're not talking about slathering butter on everything, although that doesn't sound bad either. The idea was simple. Fat creates a barrier that keeps out air and moisture. It's like giving your food a superhero cape made of grease. Among the foods buried in fat were meats like pork and poultry. Imagine a juicy chunk of meat submerged in a glorious mound of fat. Might sound a little strange today, but that's how life worked back then. Now, if you compare it to our modern methods, it's like a culinary reality show. These days we use fridges, freezers, and vacuum sealing. It's a bit more high-tech, but at its core, the idea is the same: keeping food fresh for as long as possible. Although, let's be honest, burying something in fat has its own medieval charm. So next time you hear someone say fat is bad, remember that for our ancestors, it was a real lifesaver. Now, before you run off to grab some lard for your pantry, let's talk about barrels of vinegar. If you thought vinegar was just for salads, think again. In the Middle Ages, vinegar was like the superhero of the kitchen, and not just for dressing your greens. This acidic, versatile liquid was used to preserve food. How did they do it? The answer lies in those vinegar and wine barrels that were everywhere. Picture a barrel full of wine, the kind that would go great with a nice dinner. Medieval folks used it to submerge all kinds of food: meat, fish, vegetables, anything that would fit. Vinegar didn't just act as a preservative, it helped stop those foods from spoiling. It was like having a fridge in a barrel, but with more personality. For example, fish was preserved in vinegar, which made it perfect for long voyages. So, if you've ever wondered how sailors managed to eat fresh-tasting fish in the middle of the ocean, now you know. It was vinegar on board, my friends. If we compare that to modern techniques, it's like choosing between a fridge and a pantry full of pickling jars. Today we've got all kinds of preservatives and fancy methods, but vinegar is still a classic. It's like a landline phone in the age of smartphones. You might not use it every day, but it still has its place in history. Now let's recap this journey and see how vinegar and fat came together in the saga of food preservation. Don't miss it. So, what have we learned from all these wild methods? That necessity is the mother of invention. We've seen a bunch of creative techniques, and it's amazing how each one had its purpose. In the Middle Ages, a lack of resources and the fear of hunger pushed people to think outside the box. It was like a MasterChef episode, except instead of fresh ingredients, they had to work magic with whatever they had. The creativity in food preservation didn't just save lives, it showed us how pressure brings out the best in people. When survival's on the line, you get resourceful. From pickling to drying, each technique was a response to an urgent need. Kind of like when you open the fridge and all you've got is pasta and a jar of sauce, you make it work with what you have. So next time you think there's no solution, remember our medieval friends. They were out there fighting hunger with a mix of creativity and a pinch of madness. Don't underestimate the ingenuity of your ancestors. They knew how to survive. Now it's time to say goodbye. See you in the next video. Don't forget to keep exploring and let your imagination fly. And there you have it, a journey through the culinary madness of the Middle Ages. We explored all sorts of clever food preservation methods, from salting to smoking, from pickling to dehydration. There were more techniques than in an all-you-can-eat buffet. Now, I want to know, which of these methods did you find most interesting? Would you dare try smoking food at home? Or would you stick to classic pickling? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more tasty content. It helps me a lot. So, until next time, and remember, if food doesn't get preserved, it's a medieval tragedy. Cheers.